Hello. I've been struggling to think of an idea to do for a video for a while, and I thought the best thing to do would be to do one about my setup, if I can call it that. I think for about the last 6 years I've been using what you would call, I guess, a digital setup, in the fact that I'm not actually running a actual amp or any actual pedals. I've been using this software called Guitar Rig by Native Instruments for a very long time, and you know, the first few versions of the software were kind of good. You know, that they were the best as far as amp simulation, I should say commercial amp simulation, that you could find. There were some really good plugins during the later part of the 90s by Simul Analog, and they'd modeled a really good like Marshall and a Fender and a good tube screamer. So at the time it sounded great, but unfortunately the hardware that was available to us back then, it didn't really do the software justice. The inputs and just the signals were just very noisy, and it didn't, you know, the sampling wasn't just from the signal point of view, not from the modeling point of view, it just wasn't really happening. So I guess let's get to the good stuff. Now, I use the RK3 pedal, this little thingy in this corner here that you're seeing now, and this kind of acts as an interface and a controller. Now, for a very long time I was just using the Guitar Rig software, and just basically I would have like one preset that was my kind of go-to preset, and I would use snapshots to kind of jump around the sounds. So if I bring this over here so I can make some noise. So basically I would have kind of 3 sounds in this one preset, and you know, that was usually more than enough to get me through, you know, a very small kind of gig or just a small kind of performance. So, for example, this would be like a clean sound. And then I would have kind of just 2 other sounds of the same preset. So I would snapshot to a kind of a crunchier kind of tone. And then finally I'd have like a very high gain kind of lead. So let's just switch that on. The reason why I'd use these snapshots is I would have different settings. So as you notice there, for the lead, the delay became much more kind of louder and prominent. And then the good thing is I could get kind of effect spillover, so I could go from this massive kind of delayed lead back to a clean sound. that's a slightly newer preset where I tried kind of getting a slightly more fuller sound. My main kind of go-to preset, let's pull it up here. I call it the Tone Master. It's kind of a mixture of the kind of sounds I've kind of heard from my kind of favorite players and tried to kind of get. But it didn't really work out very well, unfortunately. The clean sound is very kind of weedy, very thin. The crunch. The lead though is kind of where I kind of managed to get the kind of sound I was after, that it's a little bit too more scooped for my liking. So, for a long time I was using Guitar Rig, and then I used to visit this really great forum called guitarampmodeling.com, and I noticed there was like a free section, which we all love, and there was some free amps floating around by some very I'd heard the names before. I tried their plugins a long time ago, and I remember liking them. They didn't specifically meet what I was looking for at the time, but they were definitely people to kind of keep an eye out on. And there was one guy in particular, I think, a guy called who he did this model called the Solo C, which was like a Soldano kind of model, and it was one of the few kind of Soldano models that I'd heard that had actually captured the kind of, not just the color of the amp, but the actual feel. It had that kind of very biting, saggy kind of response that you could expect from like a Hot Rod 50 or an SLO. And I actually ended up using that amp quite a lot on my second album. But there was one small problem in that, unfortunately the Arcade 3 unit, for some stupid reason, was designed only to control the Guitar Rig software. So I could use it as an interface, but all the pedals and foot switching options, I couldn't use it with any other kind of amp software, and it was this really ridiculous situation. And it's one of the reasons that I really didn't spend much time with these newer amps. It's just I couldn't see how I could use them in a live setting, and really when I record or make presets, I always try and make them around what I would use live. And generally speaking, I couldn't see how I'd make that work. And it was really two things that kind of changed my way of thinking about this. One of the things that were responsible was this software by SM Pro Audio, I think the website's here. They made this software called VFX, which was designed to run on their own hardware units. The one that caught my attention was something called a V-pedal, which is something that hasn't come out yet, and I have no idea if it ever will actually come out. But the V-pedal's concept was it could run VST plugins on its own mixer software, and you could assign your own controllers on the pedals, and it seemed like a really great idea. And they put the software up as a free download, so I downloaded the VFX software, and the original version, which I downloaded many years ago, was good. It was a little bit buggy, and then by luck, I think it was a couple of months ago, I popped by the website again and saw there was an update for the software. So I kind of got lucky in that respect. that the software was less buggy and it kind of ran the software, the plugins much better. So it's just using my BlackBerry. So here's the software. There's my bank at the top, just called Dreamfullofzen. Presets called Ecstasy Clean. Okay, we've got a green gate as a noise gate. Poulen's Lextech and Le Cab running. And let's hear how that sounds. Now, there's lots of pops and cracks because I'm obviously recording video at the same time, which I shouldn't really be doing, but as you can hear, that's a lot more fuller sounding than my clean sounds on Guitar. And that was kind of just the very first preset I did without too much kind of fussing around. I could see that the MIDI implementation in VFX was actually really good and very easy to set up. But the problem was that I still didn't have a MIDI controller, and then luckily, just by chance, I kind of popped onto the Native Instruments forum to kind of complain, and I saw they'd released the controller editor, the software which allowed you to finally, after years of pain and annoyance, be able to use the RK3 unit or any other unit as a MIDI controller. So now I had this great kind of rig possibility that I could do now digitally using this new software and these free plugins. So I mean, I started experimenting a little bit, seeing how good the implementation is. And for example, this is the clean sound with lots of cracks. And now I've just kicked in a chorus onto the clean sound. Okay, so that's a clean sound. Now what I've kind of done here is I wanted to test the possibilities of how I would switch between presets and banks. I was under the impression that I couldn't do it in VFX, that it was a limitation of the software, and then, as usually the case, I actually bothered to read the manual and found out that no, I can actually change presets using controller changes on MIDI. It's not just for the hardware only, I can actually do it on the computer as well. So let me just whip out the BlackBerry again. That's me, and there's the software. Now like I said, I've got it set up. So this is the chorus. Chorus is off. Chorus is on. Off. On. Now I've kind of got this particular button here, which is kind of the next bank, or next preset, sorry. I've actually got it set to switch to a specific preset. So now that the controller's kicked in, so this is my clean preset. Now it's kind of kicked into a slightly dirty, what I've called my Ecstasy Plexi kind of red, which is the Poulen Lextech on the red channel with the Plexi on, and just the green gate, no other pedals in the front, and that actually sounds like this.